IT Society, welcome back to the Antisocial Planet. Today we are checking out 17 S.Coup's Me song. I am actually pretty excited about this, not only because we're getting like a little extra bonus song from him. I know I'm catching up on stuff I'm behind, I get it, okay? But he has writing credits on it, and honestly, I don't have any idea what this is because I don't think I heard any talk about it, which makes me like a little bit sad, but I don't think I've heard anything of it at all, like even what it's about. So I'm going into this very unaware of what I'm about to walk into, but you know what? It's an S.Coup song. That's really all I need to know. That's enough to sell me on it. Just look at this picture too. How am I supposed to pay attention to anything he has to say when he's looking like that? I will, but I just want him to understand that it's effort on my part, okay? Anyway, S.Coup's Me. Okay. Ooh. Wasn't expecting some guitar. Wait, okay, I don't want to fully interrupt, but you can't give me vocals for S.Coups and not expect me to have a moment. I know he can sing, I understand, but I love that because he has such a soft voice and it's so like breathy, right, when he's singing, in such a contrast to when he gets into more of his like rapping cadence, right, that it has this nice gentle ease into the rest of the song, right? Like we start to get that grit coming into his voice as he starts to tighten up his vocal cords and get some more like push behind the sound, right? Some more like aggression to it. And I think that that's such a beautiful like storytelling of that moment too, of him being like realizing all of these things, of seeing a different person, right? A different version of himself, and that person like being on the edge of a cliff. And I don't entirely know how we're going to like pull all that together right yet, but in terms of what the narrative is, but I think that there's this building of emotion just in the way that he's performing it. And I love that this has like a, I don't know, like slower, almost like rock sound to it. Like it's a bit of a pop rock sound in terms of instrumentation. And again, getting some of that grit in his voice really fits with that. Something that's like a little bit melancholy, but there's like a certain like edge to it as well, which I think so far is like leaning into some of what the lyrics are getting into. I don't have enough lyrics yet though to like fully stake my claim on what the song might be about. Flip up. Ooh, okay, I love this like build up with the guitars too. This kind of like chunky strumming to it. I love this idea of these two sides, right? Like who you are on the inside and who you are on the outside. And I think for someone who is a performer, that's something that you definitely have to reconcile with yourself, is that there's like someone who is like the performer, the outward persona, and then who you actually are. And those can be like very different things, especially since there's a certain like performance to being a performer, but also just like being someone in the public eye, right? And I think that we all have that to some extent, right? I think that we all kind of have a certain filter in how we present ourselves externally, especially for like different situations, right? Like the way that we act in front of our friends is going to be different than at our job, right? We're going to put forward a certain version of ourselves for a professional setting as opposed to a casual setting with friends. And those are going to be different things despite what might be going on internally, but it's pushed to an extreme when you're someone who's like in the public eye the way that S.Coups is. Even just like name differences there, right? There's like Sungcha and then there's S.Coups, right? And like those can feel like very competing personalities within someone, especially as a idol. There's like a very specific kind of persona that you're supposed to have, and S.Coups as a person is like a very bright and happy and likes to laugh and joke around. Like he has a very bright and upbeat personality that he brings to being a performer, and also like energy behind it, but that doesn't mean that there aren't like other things going on for the person behind that idol. So I think it's really interesting for him to be talking about almost not recognizing your reflection in the mirror and like seeing these two very opposite opposing sides, and even being like a scaredy cat of like feeling like you can't meld those two things together of the internal person and the external person. And I feel like that can be very scary when you have a lot of eyes on you and a lot of judgment and opinions and assumptions that can come with that, right? Like even the best meaning fans, right? People who actually do care about him and want him to be happy and want him to be able to be more of his genuine self still can make like assumptions about him that don't turn out to be right. And that's not from a place of being like malicious. It can just be because we only have so much information about who he is, right? As there's this disconnect intentionally between like us and the idols, because there should be for like privacy reasons and all of that, right? Like he's there to be like a performer and to do his job, and that's not the same as us like being friends with him. But I think it's such an interesting concept in general that I really like that there are more, I've noticed anyway, idols kind of digging into some of that specific struggle and like making songs that are like these little passion projects like on the sides of main discographies to dig into some of that, where maybe they can be a little bit more candid than on an official release. Love his performance. I love his voice, that flip up that we got, that like lightening up of that sound, some vulnerability that comes in with having that lighter sound is just beautiful. Ooh, okay, I love those vocalizations of lengthening out that like I am, right? Which I think is like the title of the song. So it's being translated to like me, but like it also could be like I am, right? This kind of, I don't know, again, like not being like S.Coup, not being Sungchao, not being 17, like being just me, right? Like being that internal experience in which all of those things simultaneously exist, which I think can be like very jarring for like anyone who's in the public eye. If there's all of these assumptions, versions of him that people see, and then you're like the one living that, it must be very strange to have all of these people talking about you and having opinions and assumptions, and then you're like the actual person in question and you have to just sit back and see what's happening. But I love this sharing the same heart, like I was saying, right? All of these versions of him, right? Or like these different sides to him that exist simultaneously, all kind of have the same core with him, right? Of who he truly is, in which all of those things simultaneously exist. And even though like earlier on it was which me do you love, I think is so interesting, especially since we had that flip up against some of that vulnerability of thinning out the sound when we got to at least for the word love in Korean, I think is really interesting too, to have that vulnerability on something like trying to figure out like why someone loves you. And again, like as an idol, and you have all of these people who are saying that they love and care about you and are showing you all this support for the things that you're working on, right? To then question some of that admiration, right? Because how much do they know about you? And would they feel the same way if they knew more? So the insecurity that kind of gets bundled up with even having that kind of love. It's like I was saying, like we can look at this from the side of like people who have a bunch of judgments for them and have a lot of negative opinions and all of that, like people who want to be malicious in the things that they're saying, like pulling apart the things that they're doing. But I think that a much more interesting question is, what do you do when people are fans and come from this place of like genuinely wanting to show support for you, and you still have those insecurities because you're like, do you actually understand who I am? And would you feel the same way about me if you knew more about me? And feeling that insecurity again of going back to him saying like the kind of like scaredy cat of like, how much of myself do I want to show? Because at the end of the day, would that have the same like admiration? But like making your peace of it's all me, right? Like it all comes back to me being who I am. And as long as I can figure out like who that person truly is, it's a little bit easier to compartmentalize the parts of yourself that you need to show for different parts of your life. Like I was saying, we all do it to some extent. We all do it for our job. It's just not to the same like general public scrutiny of someone who's like a celebrity or someone who's in the public eye for their job, right? But there's a certain professionalism that you bring to doing your job that you wouldn't if you're like hanging with your friends or your siblings or whatever, right? So I think it's a really interesting concept again of seeing these different sides of oneself and still kind of like reconciling that all comes together at the central part of who you are. And just, I love this kind of like soft kind of pop rock sound that we're getting as well. Even the "so to you I am one," I think is more of maybe self-talk of, as long as I know who I am, that's what really matters, right? If I don't lose track of who I am, that is the most important thing. It goes back to the beginning of the song where he's like, I don't even know who I'm looking at in the mirror anymore, right? Like, I feel like I've become two different people, and it's that disconnect between the core of who you are that is causing some of the turmoil and that like uncertainty and insecurity, right? Whereas like when you know who you are, it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say about you because you understand where you're coming from, and other people can like make false assumptions, again, maybe from a place of being fans and wanting to be understanding, and they just don't know the full situation of what's going on with you. But as long as you understand who you are, you can hold up against a lot of that. So I think that is a really interesting kind of internal analysis or self-reflection with like, I really the kind of, again, this like pop rock sound that's coming with it too. Again, like it's nostalgic, there's a little bit of melancholy to it, but also a little bit of a gritty edge to it. A little cry at the end there too. Ooh, okay. I think it's interesting too. We get like a little bit more grit to his voice, a little bit more aggression to his delivery. And I think that really fits with what he's talking about of the lies sticking, right? Like this idea of people telling lies and it becomes the truth and it follows him around. And I think it's interesting to have this comparison to like a smell. And obviously translations are going to be what they are. And I don't know fully all the context because I don't speak enough Korean to fully pull that all apart. And I'm sorry. But I think the idea of it being like this smell that you can't shake is also like really interesting too, because I think that we all know that anything that smells bad, we all notice, right? Like it's difficult to shake something like that off. And I think that it's interesting to have, it's something that's like invisible, but like pervasive, right? Like it consumes a space. And I think that is really interesting comparison to this idea of people saying all of these things and the like, lies becoming truths and feeling like you can't get rid of something because it is like this invisible thing, right? Yeah, words that are easily said, I think is also interesting because it is easy to point the fingers, like it says, point your fingers and say that I'm a scaredy cat. And I think it goes into some of him being like, there were times when I couldn't say anything. And that is very much within the idol image of there's only so much you can say and you can't bite back the way that you might if you were just like an average person walking around, as opposed to like being someone who's an idol interacting with people having lots of things to say in an online space. And it's so easy to say something and to write out a message on like social media and post it than to like actually take the time to understand the nuances of somebody. It's so much easier to make assumptions about someone, especially if it's in line with like your own beliefs about someone, your own assumptions, if it proves your own ideas that you already have of who that person is. It's so much easier to say those things than to like fully see someone as this fully fleshed out human being. And again, that can be, I feel like this verse is coming from the perspective of people like intentionally being malicious in the things that they're saying, but it can also be from like a fan space again, right? Of people like having all these assumptions about who he is as a person. And it can be from this very like genuine place of wanting to show him compassion, but it's so much easier to like see him as an idol and see him as S.Coups and see him as this like very simplified person than to understand like the nuances of who he is and the fact that he isn't going to be perfect. He isn't going to like never make contradictions with himself, right? Like there's so many complexities to who someone is, and that's a lot harder to understand and to give grace to than to just make up your mind and say things regardless of whether or not you have any backing to them. And I like that we're getting a little bit more of this grittier delivery from him and the vocal delivery of it. And I like that there's a few moments in that where you can hear him take this harsh breath too. I feel like breath a lot of the time is something that kind of gets erased from recordings because it can be more of a distraction than adding into it. But I think that it adds into to have that like really harsh breath because I think that it adds some of that emotion, right? Where like you're breathing harder when you have this like anger that's kind of like boiling under the surface. And I think that it really adds to the narrative of that. And then going into, again, the chorus and having this, again, this pause almost of taking a breath and collecting yourself and not letting kind of the words get under your skin, I think is also really interesting as we go into another chorus for this.
손가락질에 겁쟁이라 욕해 두 개 이름의 나는 두 개의 삶을 살아 내 어떤 삶을 사랑하나요 두 개가 나의 나는 마음이 하나라서 당신에게나 하늘 거예요 죽고 싶어서 나의 손목을 놓지 않은 당신에게나 하늘 거예요
It's really interesting synths in this too. Like almost like off-kilter sounds. Ooh, okay, I have several thoughts. I think this line in particular, I think having that so close to the end of this is really interesting. And I feel like that could be towards like members of the group, his friends that he has in his life, support systems that I have. But I think that it also goes back to him talking to himself, of being there for himself. And again, understanding who that core person is, regardless of what other people have divided him up into, like these different personalities and everything. And I also think that the line of which me do you love, I think can also be taken multiple ways. I think that in connection to him, this more self-reflection, internal dialogue with himself can be like that question of, do I love every part of myself? Right. And I think that's a really, I don't know, that's a struggle for everybody at some point in their life, right? Of, again, we're all complex and contradictory, and we have to like pull apart those different layers and look at the ugly parts as well as like the beautiful parts and figure out a way to have compassion for all of it. But I also can see it in terms of people who have malicious things to say about him. Of, again, there's like love-hate relationship with that. Of, do you love to pull apart who I am? Do you love being able to externalize some of that like anger and frustration at a specific person? Do you love the flaws because you can pull someone down from a pedestal? I think it's also an interesting concept to pull apart. And I love that we have a little bit of an instrumental at the end of this too, just let it breathe. And I also notice at the end there that we have a different translation. I was talking before about how it's being translated into me for the title, but then it's also I am. And I think that's also really interesting to have this one symbol that can mean so much and have all these different meanings behind it and all these different ways of translating it. I think that is so reflective of what the song is about too, right? Like a single word that can have so many different meanings behind it and translations depending on the context and depending on, I don't know specifically for this one because again, Korean is not a language that I speak a lot of, but I know that depending on like pronunciation can also like change things, right? Like inflections and again, context. And that is so much of what the song is, of who he is as a person depends on context, depends on what is happening in that conversation. Because to some people he's a friend or a child, like a son, right? Or an idol or a coworker or a terrible person, or they wouldn't even know his name if they saw his face, right? Like there's so many different versions of him that he can be depending on the context of who's perceiving him. And I think it's really interesting to use a Korean word phrase that has some of that reflection and just like the translation of it. I think there's a lot of nuance to that. Far more, look, I knew when he was like, he had worked on the lyrics that I was like, I'm probably going to end up digging farther into this than I think I will, just because he had some hand in doing the lyrics for this song. And I know that there are usually a lot more complexities to the interpretation of it. But I think that's a beautiful song. Like lyrically, I think that he did a beautiful job with the performance of it, not just in terms of having these gorgeous, softer vocals at certain points, some of the vulnerability in there, but also having some of that grit, having some of that kind of bite to some of what he's saying, because I think that goes along with what he was talking about of like emotion, but also like almost this like wanting to fight back and yet understanding that at the core of the issue is, how do I understand myself, right? You can't make other people understand who you are, right? Like you can't make other people like you. You can't make other people take the time to be empathetic to who you are or see you as a complex person. You can't choose how other people feel, but you do get to choose like how you feel and how you see yourself and what goes on in your own internal world. And I think it's really interesting to have all of these complexities fighting with each other, even within the different melodies that he was choosing, where we'd have these really like light, soft vocals and then these like really gritty sounding more aggressive vocals like within the same line, right, of these highs and lows and these complexities battling with each other of like how he wants to present himself, I think really goes along with what the song was about. Fast things, I probably could sit here and talk longer, but I think at a certain point I'm spinning in circles around like the same kind of ideas, but really love the song. I didn't realize just how long I was recording for. Look, I had a lot to say. I feel like when we get songs like this that are more, again, like these kind of like side passion project songs where we get the artists working on the lyrics themselves, is when we get some very interesting insight into where the artist is, especially considering, again, that I'm catching up on this song at a later date. So putting it in context of some of the other things that were going on at the time. And I know that S.Coup was gone for a bit because he was injured and dealing with recovering from that and all of that. So I'm sure that he had time to think about things and reflect on some stuff and put together a song like this. I think this is really interesting, and probably some other things. I can think of a few different avenues of like why he might have some opinions about what people are saying about him, like military service related and stuff like that as well. So I think that it's always a time when I really want to dig into the meanings of songs and the lyrics and stuff, because again, him having writing credits on it and also something outside of like the main releases, I feel like there's a little bit more freedom in what it can be about. I know that 17 is like a bit of an exception because they do work on a lot of their stuff. They do tend to reflect some of that, but again, there's a certain like marketability to the songs that they choose to release on like an actual proper comeback as opposed to something that they can release on the side. I think that it always makes me want to dig farther into what the songs are about and what they're digging into, and I think that this song is turning in my brain even as I'm sitting here of the different sides of it and the different way that he decided to describe it. But I think for one, that little like vocalization in the chorus is stuck in my head a little bit. So I think that some points for just like also it being like a catchy song, a beautiful song to go along with it. And I do like that it has a little bit of that like rock edge to it, because I think that goes with the song, right, of breaking out of the kind of confines or like expectations, right? It could have been like a pop song or like a ballad, and I think the fact that it has a little bit of that edge or a little bit of that more upbeat feeling to it, I think also really lends to what the song is about. Of I'm not going to go into like full like ballad sad song territory about this, because I feel like I can get to the other side of it, right? Like I can figure this out, and as long as I understand who I am at my core, that's what like really matters. I feel like I'm probably going to be thinking about it a lot to go forward, of just like me digging farther into things and all of that. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm definitely curious about what other people have to say about this song and their kind of interpretations of it as well. But I hope you enjoyed listening to that along with me. You can click this playlist to go into my previous reactions, or you can subscribe to this next time I post a 17 reaction. I will see you in the next video. Bye.